The most recent Durst show featured Megyn Kelly. Great, great woman, one of my heroes, but we had a real disagreement. She said that although she believed I was innocent and that the woman who accused me of sexual misconduct was lying, that I've said enough, that I'm Alan effing Dershowitz. I don't have to speak out anymore. That's not my view. My view is speak out, sue, fight back. How many of you know that I'm 82 years old, and until this happened, this accusation, I never sued anybody, and I was never sued by anybody. These are the first lawsuits in my life. I want to pursue them. I want to be aggressive. I want to prove that this woman lied and that her lawyers put her up to it. If her lawyers suborn perjury, I want them to go to jail. I want her to go to jail for committing perjury. I don't believe in remaining silent. I think victims should speak out. Megyn Kelly had a slightly different point of view on the Durst show. We'll explore that, and I want to know what you think. Please call in and give me your views on the Durst show. Yesterday, I had my first guest on the Durst show. It was Megyn Kelly, and everybody's watching and listening to that show because Megyn Kelly was so great, and she was so provocative. And as the result of that interview, I really need your advice, my listeners, my watchers, because we had a little bit of, not a controversy, but a disagreement. And I want to know whether she's right or I'm right. You may recall if you saw the show, and if you haven't, please watch it because it really is dynamite. What she said is, having reviewed all the evidence against me by the woman who had falsely accused me, she was basically convinced that the woman was a liar and that I didn't do anything wrong, and that her advice to me was not to talk about it anymore. She put it very dramatically. She said, "You are effing Alan Dershowitz. You don't have to talk about anything. Everybody knows who you are. Everybody appreciates who you are. Everybody knows you didn't do it." And my question is she right? My wife says the same thing. My children say the same thing. That's not who I am. When this first came up, literally 5 years ago, I could have easily just said, I never heard of the woman, I never met her, that's the end, I'm not going to comment on it. I didn't want the story to go away. I wanted to disprove the allegations and make it clear to the world that I am the victim of a false accusation, the victim of an extortion plot, the victim of an attempt to get money not only from me but other rich people, that lawyers got together and pressured this woman into falsely accusing me. I want to see the lawyers indicted and sent to prison. I want to see the woman indicted and sent to prison for perjury. I'm not satisfied with the story just going away because I'm not only speaking on my own behalf, I'm speaking on behalf of every falsely accused victim. And one thing about Megyn Kelly is she has been on the side of victims all the time. We talked on the interview yesterday about the movie Bombshell and about the expose that she helped put together of the real predators, some of them at Fox News. And I'm sure her position is that victims of sexual harassment ought to speak out. I agree. Victims of sexual abuse must speak out. They may not be silenced. But why should victims of false accusations of sexual abuse not speak out? I'm a victim. I'm a victim of a plot, a deliberate plot to falsely accuse me for money and to silence my voice on Israel, to silence my voice on civil liberties, to silence my voice on the Constitution. And it has succeeded. My voice was silenced. I was canceled by the 92nd Street Y. I was canceled by colleges and universities. I'm being canceled as we speak today. So I just don't think I have the option of silence. Maybe I had it back 5 years ago, but that's not who I ever was. I always fight back. I always counterattack. For me to remain silent in the face of a false accusation would be to do what I think others are now doing in politics, and that is not confronting accusations, maybe because the accusations are true, maybe because they're false, maybe because they're trying to protect their children or other members of the family. I'm in a very fortunate position. I have nothing to hide. My private life has been exemplary. I have done nothing wrong, as I've said over and over again, from the day I met Jeffrey Epstein until today. I've had sexual contact with one woman in my life, that is, my wife. And I don't hug, I don't touch, I don't flirt. I'm not that guy. I don't go to bars, I don't proposition people. I don't do any of that. I don't have a history. I have 50 years at Harvard, many research assistants, women, many secretaries, never a complaint, never an allegation, because I never did anything. And so I need your help. You know me now. You've watched me on the Durst Show. Is Megyn Kelly right? Should I just say, look, I've won this, it's over. Those few people who still believe this lying woman, all right, I'm not going to change their mind. No evidence is going to change their mind. I already have all the evidence you need. I have her own emails admitting she never met me. I have her own manuscript admitting she saw me once and never met me. I have her lawyer on tape admitting she couldn't have met me and that she was wrong, simply wrong. I have her best friend on tape saying that she told her that she was pressured by her lawyers into making up this false accusation. I have an investigation by the former head of the FBI proving I couldn't have done it and I wasn't in any of the places she said I was. So maybe it's time to be quiet. It's just not who I am. Maybe it's who I should be. So I need your advice. I need you to call in. I need you to tell me whether you agree with Megyn Kelly or you agree with me. I'm not criticizing Megyn Kelly. She's terrific. I understand her point of view. It's the same point of view I'm getting from my friends, my family. You know, when I decided to write my book, Guilt by Accusation, a lot of my friends said, don't write it. It'll just bring more attention to it. I wrote it, and I think it was successful. Lots of people read it. Anybody who's read it has seen the evidence. They know that I have been falsely accused and framed. So there I didn't accept advice. I decided on my own to write the book. It was the right decision. Is it the right decision now? There are lawsuits. I'm suing her. She's suing me. I'm suing her lawyer. Her lawyer is suing me. At 82 years old, I never expected that I'd spend the last part of my life defending myself and suing others. Up until this happened, I never sued anybody and was never sued by anybody, ever. I've acted on behalf of other clients, but never on my own behalf. So I need your advice. I also need your advice on one other thing, because I want feedback from you. Yesterday was the first time we had a guest. I want to have more guests. Is that a good idea? Do you like me questioning guests, guests questioning me, dialogue, back and forth, or do you prefer me to just do my little monologue and take questions from you folks? My inclination is, yeah, some guests, only when they're interesting guests, because the motto of this show is, you'll never be bored. So I will never have a boring guest. And I can tell you, if everything goes the way it went with Megyn Kelly, you will be assured of the most interesting guests. I've already arranged for another fascinating guest. You'll be surprised when I put that guest on the air. But you won't be surprised at the quality of the guests, because they're all going to be, if not exactly like Megyn Kelly, as interesting as Megyn Kelly. So that's my pitch for today. If you haven't seen the Megyn Kelly interview, please watch it. It will be linked to this episode. You will understand this episode only if you watch the Megyn Kelly episode just on its own. Megyn Kelly talked about Giuffre Tubman. She gave him advice. Not only gave me advice, she gave him advice. Her advice was humorous. Stop handling it. Double entendre. Good point. Whether or not he should go forward and make a defense or just say, I've said what I have to say, she gave advice about that. Be interested in knowing what you think about that. Also about Joe and Hunter Biden. Should they just remain quiet? Or should they get out there and say, look, it was a fake laptop. It wasn't mine, but maybe it was real. Maybe it was a real laptop. Or maybe it was a real laptop which had some of his emails and some emails that were hacked into it. We don't know. The reason we don't know is because we haven't heard from the Bidens. I think we will. I think we'll hear from Joe Biden when he has the last debate with President Trump with the mics turned off. So each side will have a chance to present their views. What do you think? Is that a good idea or is not a good idea? In life, microphones don't get turned off. Should we have an artificial muting during a debate? What do you think? I want to hear from you on that issue. So I want to hear from you on every issue we discuss on this show. You can call 24/7. I'll put the number on the screen. You'll be able to hear it. You'll be able to see it. This is your show as much as it is my show. It's the Durst Show, sure, and you'll hear my point of view. You will always hear objective, neutral, nonpartisan points of view. The guests may be partisan, but I'll present nonpartisan interviews because for me, politics is for today. The Constitution is forever. For me, partisanship is for today, but principles, neutrality, morality is forever. And so one of the things we talked about with Megyn Kelly yesterday is that the media is divided. Hard right, hard left, very little in the center. And she made a good point. She said, people in the center don't go out and scream in the streets, be reasonable, be reasonable. The people who get the attention are the extremists on both sides. And so I'm not going to go out in the street and say, be moderate, be moderate. I'm just going to be reasonable and moderate and objective and neutral. And the question, of course, for the future of this show is there room in the world of podcasts for somebody who doesn't take political sides, who doesn't say Donald Trump is wrong about everything he's ever done, or he's right about everything he's ever done, or Joe Biden is right about everything or wrong about everything? You're not going to hear that here. You're going to hear nuanced criticism. You're going to hear calibrated arguments. You're going to hear, hopefully, nonpartisan realities, which are part of enduring truth. That's the Durst Show. As I promised you, you'll never be bored. You weren't bored with Megyn Kelly. You won't be bored with our next guests. And you won't be bored with me. So stay tuned. Now it's time to hear your voices and your questions. The first one is from Ari in Los Angeles.
I was wondering if you could comment on Giuffre Tubman. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I've known Giuffre for many years. He was a star student in my first year class in criminal law. He sat next to a young woman who also was a star student. You may have heard of her. Her name is Elena Kagan. She now sits on the United States Supreme Court. Elena Kagan and Giuffre Tubman were very close friends in law school and sat next to each other and often spoke up in my class. And then many of you know that Tubman and I sparred a lot on CNN when CNN still allowed me on the air. And we had these really interesting debates. One-sided. I turned out to be right all the time. He turned out to be wrong all the time. Every one of his predictions that he made about how the Supreme Court would decide cases was wrong. And every one of the predictions that I made turned out to be right, not because I'm smarter than he is, but because I don't allow ideology or personal preferences to interfere with my analysis of how cases will be decided. He does. He does the CNN thing. How does CNN want the case to be decided? And he tells the viewers, misleads them, and tells them that the court will come out the way CNN wants it to come out and the way Giuffre Tubman comes out. So he and I have had a lot of disagreements, particularly over the impeachment of President Trump. But I feel terrible for him. I feel so sad for him. Obviously, what he did was a mistake and foolish. He didn't hurt anybody except himself and his family, perhaps. And I hope that he can recover from this. I always support my former students when they have a problem, whether it be Giuffre Tubman or whether it be Mike Pompeo when he was criticized for yelling at a NPR reporter, whether it be Ted Cruz, who I sometimes disagree with, but like. I'm very proud of my former students, and they're an important part of my life. And so I'll stand behind Giuffre Tubman. I hope he remains strong, and I hope he survives this. Our next caller is from Pennsylvania, Howard.
My question has to do with the prominence of hate speech and discussion about making hate speech actually laws, and in some cases even extended to things like hate crimes, and how that is influenced or impacted by the First Amendment.
It's a great question. As you probably know, hate speech is banned and criminalized in Canada, in France, in Germany, in many other democratic countries, but not in the United States. In the United States, we don't distinguish between love speech and hate speech. If you incite people to violence immediately, go out and burn that building down, kill that person, all right, that's not protected by the First Amendment. But just saying hateful things is protected by the First Amendment. Hate crimes are different because they're actual crimes. And the question under the First Amendment is, if you committed a crime, a real crime for hateful reasons, can your sentence be enlarged? And that's very debatable and much debated today in the courts and among scholars. But the hate speech issue, at least in America, is not widely debated. I think we have taken the view, and I certainly support that view, that some judge's opinion about whether speech is motivated by hate or love shouldn't determine the constitutionality of a given bit of speech. By the way, probably as many crimes, certainly crimes of passion, are committed as a result of love as a result of hate. So these are very subjective criteria, and as a matter of law and constitutional law particularly, I'd stay away from them. Judge the conduct on its own, judge the speech on its own by objective criteria. Hate and love are not particularly objective criteria. Our next caller is from New York. Abner?
I was wondering, I understand that John Adams defended people because he thought they had the right to a fair trial, but do you think there's a point where someone has too much working for them, like O.J. Simpson, who was widely perceived to be guilty, yet never mind?
No, it's a good question. Forget about the never mind. It's a good question. Look, John Adams was reviled, hated by the people of Boston because he defended the killers of those people who were victims of the Boston Massacre. British Redcoat police shot and killed Crispus Attucks and other brave, heroic American patriots. And yet John Adams, who was a great lawyer, stood up on their behalf. He lost friends, he lost relatives over that issue. And the question today is, who are the descendants of John Adams? Who are the people who deserve recognition for defending the most guilty? I certainly wouldn't compare myself to John Adams, but I have certainly followed his tradition. And I think today, people who are prepared to defend those who are accused, whether falsely or truthfully, of crimes relating to sex, those who are willing to defend people accused by the Me Too movement, they're the new John Adams. Because we are reviled for doing that. I was reviled for defending Jeffrey Epstein, for consulting with Harvey Weinstein's lawyers. Back in the day, I defended Mike Tyson. He was accused of rape, falsely in my view, but I didn't get criticized for that. I did get criticized a bit for O.J. Simpson, but in my mind, the most reviled, the people who most people think are guilty, are the ones who really need my advocacy. And I'm proud of the fact that I have defended many people, some of whom turned out to be absolutely innocent. If you watch the movie Reversal of Fortune, you'll see that Klaus von Bülow, there was no crime, simply no crime at all. And yet he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, but I helped get him acquitted. So I'm proud of the role I've played. John Adams is one of my heroes. I've often wondered why there's no memorial to John Adams. There is to Washington, there is to Jefferson, but not to John Adams, our second president. I think he was a great man, and I think he was a great lawyer and led the way for the rest of us who believe strongly that everybody charged with a crime is entitled to a zealous defense. Hey, Joe, you're from Connecticut. What's your point?
Professor Dershowitz, thank you for the insightful podcast. Wanted to say that I disagreed with a comment you recently made on voter fraud. I think that voter fraud, even if it occurs in a relatively small amount, could have a very significant impact on the election. Take, for example, Michigan, which was won by Donald Trump in 2016 by fewer than 11,000 ballots. If there were just 1/4% of voter fraud in that election in Michigan in favor of Hillary Clinton, she would have won that state.
Mm-hmm.
If this were to occur in a few battleground states this year, it could absolutely change the outcome of the election. Some states like Washington have been doing mail-in ballots for years and have systems and processes in place to conduct an accurate election, while other states are doing widespread voter by mail for the first time. And as a result, mistakes have been made and reports of tens of thousands of inappropriate ballots being sent to voters have been made. While tens and thousands are small as a percentage of the millions of ballots that have been sent, the thousands in certain states can have huge consequences. Mm-hmm. In summary, while I agree that there will likely not be tens of millions or millions of fraudulent ballots cast, it's not inconceivable that voter fraud could determine the outcome of the election, and in my opinion, that is not good.
Great question, great comment. I agree with you. I think there could be voter fraud. I think there could be voter mistakes, and I think it could impact the election. But you haven't talked about the other side of the coin. If you don't have mail-in ballots, there will be tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people who will not vote and who will be disenfranchised. And those votes, too, could determine the outcome of the election. So let's assume hypothetically you had a state like Michigan. You talked about Michigan. And let's assume in the end there are 1,000 wrong ballots, fraud or mistaken ballots. That should never have been counted, but they are counted. And on the other hand, you have 10,000 people who were entitled to vote but wouldn't have voted but for the ability to do it by mail. I'm one of them. I'm not in Michigan, but I'm 82 years old. I'm not going to the polling place to vote during the middle of a pandemic. For the first time in my life, I'm voting by mail. So you have to balance how many votes are improperly cast fraudulently or erroneously by mail-in ballots against the number of votes that wouldn't have been cast that should be cast because we have mail-in ballots. And if the ratio is 10-1 or 100-1 or a very high ratio, you want to err on the side of allowing more votes, even if you know that some of them may be fraudulent. So I think you're half right. I think you're right about the fraudulent part of it, but you didn't focus enough, in my view, on how many legitimate votes would not be counted unless we had write-in ballots. Look, there's no free lunch. Every time you allow any opening of voters, any permissible voting, you're going to have a little bit of fraud. But it's made up for by the number of actual voters who get to vote. So thank you for your great question, and I agree with half of it. Dorothy in Florida, what's your question?
My question is about the Iranian nuclear deal. I was thrilled when that deal got scrapped by the Trump administration, but if Joe Biden is elected, would he have the ability to put it back in place? I'd also like to know your personal opinion on some of the chess pieces that seem to be moving very quickly in Middle East peace negotiations. Do you think that any of this was a fallout from walking back that Iranian deal? Thank you, and thank you for this wonderful podcast. I think it's terrific. My question is about the Iranian nuclear deal. I was thrilled when that deal got scrapped by the Trump administration, but if Joe Biden is elected, would he have the ability to put it back in place? I'd also like to know your personal opinion on some of the chess pieces that seem to be moving very quickly in Middle East peace negotiations. Do you think that any of this was a fallout from walking back that Iranian deal? Thank you, and thank you for this wonderful podcast. I think it's terrific.
Thanks for your kind words. I agree with you 100%. The Iran deal was a disaster, paying billions of dollars in cash and satchels, in briefcases, on airplanes, to the greatest pursuers of terrorism and instigators of terrorism was a dreadful, dreadful mistake. It also incentivized the Iranians to develop a nuclear program. After all, it had a termination point fairly soon in time, which was a green light to Iran to develop nuclear weapons. And if you think North Korea is dangerous, Iran is much, much, much more dangerous. And I'm glad that President Trump did what he did. I think Joe Biden will probably try to get us back in the deal, but maybe with different terms. What I would hope, if he asked me my advice, I would say to him, if you're going to get back in the deal, extend it to 25 years, not 8 years or 10 years. Extend it during the lifetime of this regime, hopefully, which will not last 25 years. I would like to see this regime toppled. I would like to see it overthrown. I would like to see some form of democracy in Iran. Are we going to get it? I don't know. President Biden does have the authority to, by executive action, reinstate the deal. I think it was a terrible mistake for President Obama, for whom I voted, but I criticized him, wrote a book called The Case Against the Iran Deal. I think it was a terrible mistake for him to do this by just executive action. It was a treaty, basically, and he should have had to get a supermajority in the United States Senate, which he did not get and could not have gotten. And so when you don't have a treaty, when you have just an executive signing of an agreement, any president can rescind it, and then any other president can put it back in place. I don't think that a President Biden, if he were to be elected, would just go back to the Iran deal. I don't think that would be a wise thing to do, and I don't think he would do it. I think he would try to negotiate back into the deal with some changes. The most important changes are better ability to inspect and investigate, because I think we're seeing a lot of nuclear action being taken now under the agreement, which, remember, is still in effect. The Europeans still remain in the deal, and the Iranians are cheating left and right. That's number one. Number two, the sunset provision of the deal. Remember, the deal began by saying Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. But that's in the prologue. That should be part of the deal. The never should be part of the deal. And it should be a deal that lasts forever, if not forever, at least 25 years, which in diplomatic terms is forever. So if President becomes Joe Biden, I think we'll see some effort to renegotiate the deal. I hope that it will be a much, much tougher deal, and I hope that Iran will never develop nuclear weapons. I have to tell you one thing. Israel will never allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. No matter how many sacrifices it takes, it will stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And I think that the Gulf states know that, which is why they are now becoming closer to Israel, because they know they can count on Israel to protect them from Iran, perhaps more than they can count on other countries. And so I think we're seeing strengthening of ties between Israel and the Sunni Arab countries based on self-interest. I think Obama helped drive these Gulf countries into Israel's corner by making it clear that they couldn't count on Obama to protect them from Iran, but they could count on Israel and perhaps the United States to protect them from Iran. And I see this in a very positive way. I've played a tiny, tiny, tiny role in helping to bring together some of the countries in the Middle East and in helping to consult on the peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians. And I hope to continue to play a positive role regardless of who the president is. I've advised presidents since Jimmy Carter on issues relating to the Middle East, and I make myself available to any president, regardless of party, if they want to help bring about peace in the Middle East. So thank you for your great question. Okay, here is our last call.
Hi, Professor. You mentioned that you don't think Biden would pack the court, and therefore it's not a risk to vote for him. But I'm a little surprised that you didn't point out sort of the obvious situation here, where he's the oldest president to ever be elected. He could die or become incapacitated, and then Harris is showing signs that she would pack the court. I don't think we know much about her, so can you address that, please? Thanks.
That's a really, really good question. You're right. I didn't think about or speak about whether or not a President Harris would pack the court. I don't know the answer to that. I think she'd be somewhat more likely to do it than a President Biden. And you're right, when you elect the oldest president in the history of our country, you're also electing a vice president. Remember when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected for his fourth term, the selection of the vice president was the most important act he did. He was being pressured to nominate somebody from the hard left, a man named Wallace, and he thought better of it and nominated Harry Truman, for which he was much criticized because Truman was not well known. And Truman, of course, did become the president very soon after the election of 1944, I think in April of 45, and became a great president on many issues and is now remembered as a great president. So we just don't know. But when you vote for Joe Biden, you're voting for Joe Biden and Harris. And when you vote for Trump, you're voting for Trump and Pence. And so they're both old. And there is the risk when you have any president who's old. Look, John Kennedy was very young and he was assassinated. So the vice president choice is very important. And I thank you for your question, because we do have to think hard about what a President Harris might do if she assumed the office of the presidency, either during this term or perhaps if Joe Biden became a one-term president, if she then ran and got the nomination to succeed him. So thanks for your great question. Thanks for all of your questions. Your questions are a very important part of the Der Show. I enjoy very much answering your questions. You know, I don't know about your questions until I hear them live on the air when they're presented to me. And so I have no preparation for your questions. And I like being able to respond spontaneously to what you have on your mind. So please keep calling in, and please give me the advice I've asked for earlier in the show about whether I should keep my mouth shut because I'm Alan F. Dershowitz, or whether I should continue to fight the battles that I've fought for so many years. Thank you, and look forward to speaking to you and seeing you on the next Der Show. We want you to call. We want to hear your views. The phone number is 216-710-0050. That's 216-710-0050. Your voice is an important part of the show. We're available to take your calls 24/7 at 216-710-0050. The Der Show is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else where you hear your podcast. So please, we want you to listen and watch The Der Show.